1 week, Keir Starmer lost his Deputy Prime Minister. The second week, he had to fire his ambassador to Washington, D.C. So in this episode of Newscast, the BBC's daily news podcast, we're going to ask what is actually going on in number 10 Downing Street. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and we're going to look back at some of the big events at Westminster this week. Of course, the biggest one was Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, sacking Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson, as the ambassador to Washington, D.C. All of this happening on the eve of Donald Trump's state visit to the UK next week. What is intriguing about this story is where it has gone. You're hearing lots of whispers in Westminster about the role of a guy called Morgan McSweeney. He's not exactly a household name, but he is the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and has been by Keir Starmer's side ever since he became leader of the opposition, all through the election. And people say he's been the real kind of author, if you like, of what Starmerism really is. So the focus is turned onto him because he was involved in Peter Mandelson's appointment as ambassador. So that's the background. Let's dive into the details now and see what we've learned this week. And two people who've been observing it with their magnifying glasses, because that's their job, are here in the studio. Sienna Rodgers is deputy editor of The House magazine. Hello, Sienna.
Hello.
And before that, you were at Labour List, so you were immersed in everything that happened in the Labour Party, weren't you?
Yes, for many years. It was deeply painful.
Happy memories?
No.
Okay. And also Patrick Maguire, who's now chief political commentator at The Times. Hello, Patrick.
Hello, Adam.
And you've written a column today kind of summing up some of the stuff that's happened this week. What was your kind of thesis for your column? What was your kind of like the central thought?
The central thought was Peter Mandelson sort of embodies the essential incoherence of this Labour government, because in opposition we'd constantly hear, Peter Mandelson, the old Machiavel from the New Labour years, is pulling Keir Starmer's strings, he's his crucial advisor, and that was never really true. What was true is he was close to people like Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's chief of staff, and other key aides around him. But it was in that difference. He never really had a hotline to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has long been suspicious of Blairites like Peter Mandelson because they never really hid their sense that he wasn't up to the job they had done. And that sort of pick and mix approach, you have aides over here who think this, you've got a leader over here who might think something, but we don't really know what it is, everyone's trying to drag it out of him, has sort of played out in a way that's more damaging than any scandal, which is just this Labour government and this Prime Minister in particular doesn't really know what it stands for. One day it's New Labour, one day it's Old Labour or Blue Labour. It looks to the soft left, then it speaks the language of the right on immigration. It acknowledges New Labour has failed and then imitates it almost beat for beat in presentation.
Because what was the phrase you wrote? It's Starmer's government is something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue.
Yeah, exactly. That's the fundamental problem. It's not coherent. And Peter Mandelson always resents, he's still alive.
Probably still does, yeah.
Resents the idea that he was just the spin guy, that New Labour was all about spin and presentation. Obviously, it was very good at that, but what it was built on, and Mandelson started this work in the 80s under Kinnock, was thinking about Labour's policy from first principles, totally remaking it, and only then being able to communicate it clearly in a changing world. And that is something Keir Starmer's Labour Party has never done.
So is your kind of your big argument that Mandelson represents a certain kind of bit of the Labour Party and a certain kind of governing and a certain way of viewing the world and how you wield power, and Starmer sort of adopted a bit of that, but he's also adopted lots of other things, and actually really to succeed you should choose one.
Yes, exactly. And he didn't learn its fundamental lesson. Now, that's not to say if you did a Mandelsonian review of policy from first principles, you might not end up with a menu of policy options that might lean one way on this or another on that. Rachel Reeves, the Treasury, would say, look, I'm deregulating XYZ to drive growth, which is progressive, right? That might seem contradictory for the Labour Party, but there's an internal coherence to it. Instead, this Labour Party hasn't learnt that fundamental lesson about thinking about what it stands for, what the world is, how it's changed from first principles. Instead, it's been all positioning, all tactics. Yes, there's an electoral strategy, but in terms of ideology and what it stands for, it hasn't really picked any option. And that just leaves you totally rudderless. And if that's not being driven by the Prime Minister, as it was by Tony Blair, to say nothing of the people around him as was the case with Peter Mandelson, very influential, but not the guy driving that change and embodying the project, ditto Gordon Brown, you're just going to end up directionless and prone to be blown up to an even greater extent by scandals like this one.
I mean, we've gone straight into the deep political philosophy stuff, which, I mean, is very enjoyable, so we may as well keep pursuing it. Sienna, what's the big thing you think has been revealed about how this government works by all the stuff that's happened this week? And maybe the stuff that happened last week as well with Angela Rayner. I
don't think it has been that revealing, in that I think Patrick and I have been saying the same things for a very long time, which is this all of the kind of failures we've seen from this government so far go back to when Keir Starmer was first elected as Labour leader. We know just from then that he didn't have a base in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and that has some advantages: agility, flexibility.
And basically that's because he came to politics quite late. He had his own sort of way of doing things. He wasn't part of like a big group. He hadn't come up through the trade unions. He didn't have loads of mates who were of the same sort of ilk as him.
Exactly. So it was really difficult to kind of place him. Most people thought he's basically a Fabian, kind of from the middle of the party, not really soft left, but yeah, middle Fabian. But you can't really say that he's taken kind of Fabian values and pulled them through in terms of policy. So I think that would be
and the Fabians are kind of like
well.
a think tank, but also like a tradition of how you view the world. It's a sort of...
Yes, exactly. Like contributory principles, for example, very important to the Fabians. There is a whole kind of policy set there, a mindset that you'd come from that I don't think has been particularly evident in this government. So you can't really say that. He had this kind of, obviously he was DPP for a long time. He wasn't like many of the other kind of Labour MPs, candidates, coming from that kind of particular section in the Labour Party where he had the kind of reliable base. And because of that, Morgan McSweeney sort of picked him. And he has made up for the kind of vacuity, I don't think it's unfair to say, at the centre of the Keir Starmer project. But I think what we're seeing more and more is that you cannot rely on a Labour organiser who is very skilled in many ways, good political instincts in many ways, but you cannot rely on him to provide the heart, the core of the whole government. It's too much to put on one man. And yes, he's made this extraordinary mistake, I would say, with Lord Mandelson's appointment. It seems they did ignore multiple warnings from very credible figures and less credible. It's a mistake that shouldn't have happened, but why did it happen? And if we look at that, it's because McSweeney is being relied upon far too much.
And Patrick, just to explain why this story about our ambassador in Washington seems in Westminster to be very quickly morphing into a story about Keir Starmer's chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney.
Well, as Sienna was saying there, it's not a secret in Westminster that Morgan McSweeney and Peter Mandelson are close politically and have been close personally. Peter Mandelson, look, in the first book on the Labour Party I wrote with Gabriel Pogren, there's a quote from Peter Mandelson in there saying whoever invented Morgan McSweeney will get their place in heaven, because in Peter Mandelson's eyes, Morgan McSweeney was the guy who saved the Labour Party from Corbynism more than anybody else. And that is the key link between Peter Mandelson and Downing Street. Morgan McSweeney and other people, to be fair to both of them. Peter Mandelson's been around a long time, served many of Keir Starmer's aides and members of the cabinet. So he's a very familiar figure, but that relationship is a key one. Bouncing ideas off each other, dispensing strategic counsel. In no means sort of saying this is, Peter Mandelson wants this, Morgan McSweeney, you tell Keir to do this. It's not like that, but it's a discussion about ideas and politics and where the Labour Party is going right and wrong. And so when Sue Gray, Morgan McSweeney's predecessor as Chief of Staff, now Baroness Gray, of course, was in Downing Street, Peter Mandelson's name was not on the shortlist for ambassador. When there was that change over in Orkut, or whatever you want to call it, last October, there was a change in approach from Number 10. There was a new resolution to find not a career diplomat, but a politician who could navigate the choppy waters of a second Trump presidency. And Morgan McSweeney, there's no denial that he was instrumental in getting Peter Mandelson the job. And hindsight is 2020. Yes, the links with Epstein were known at the time, not to the extent they were now. It didn't stop Peter Mandelson, being widely interviewed and featuring on many outlets and giving advice to, loads of people, right? And so Peter and also was the EU Trade Commissioner. That was the sort of case they were making in government at the time. But given how this has unfolded, and given the existing narrative, what we've just been discussing now about Morgan McSweeney is the key guy, Morgan McSweeney is providing the politics, Morgan McSweeney as the real driver of Keir Starmer's train, as it were, this is all reverberating back onto Morgan McSweeney. Now, about that, I'd say two very short things. The first is this criticism is a hardy perennial. There are lots of Labour MPs who are uncomfortable with the general direction of the Labour Party and sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly, pin all those sins on Morgan McSweeney. The second thing is, and this is...
Because it's a way of criticising the Prime Minister without criticising him personally and being disloyal.
Yeah. Exactly, right. Criticising the Prime Minister is career-threatening or career-ending. Criticising Morgan McSweeney is not. You can sound off about the Chief of Staff, say he's not really Labour, blow off some steam, that's fine. But it saves you the career-threatening risk of criticising the Prime Minister. And also, in just saying, this isn't the Labour Party, absolves you from saying, well, this is what I think I do. This is I would do. This is what how I think we should navigate all this difficult stuff. It would be better if we were just more left wing. That's the sort of thing. So that's not saying there aren't criticisms to be made or mistakes haven't been made. It's just a very easy thing for people to do in this scenario.
And Sienna, in terms of the Mandelson story, do we think it's kind of over now? Or is it going to morph into a campaign by people to remove Morgan McSweeney? And also, I noticed that the Conservatives are trying to keep the Mandelson thing going, and the Lib Dems have joined in too. All sorts of talks about using tactics in Parliament to get documents from the recruitment process released. Do you think it's going to have a longer tail?
Well, I can see them trying to use the kind of tricks that Keir Starmer used in
during
opposition.
Brexit,
yeah, very, very well, those kind of parliamentary tactics. And actually, this week has been significant in that Kemi Badenoch, perhaps more revealing than about the Labour Party, this is her best week as Tory leader. She did really well at PMQs. She kept her questions very focused on Mandelson, didn't use that scattergun approach.
Does the Prime Minister have full confidence in Peter Mandelson?
Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying the victims of Epstein are the forefront of our minds. The Ambassador has repeatedly expressed his deep regret for his association with him. He's right to do so. I have confidence in him, and he's playing an important role in the UK-US relationship.
And she understood that she has a real utility in terms of using... Yes, she doesn't have very many MPs, but she's still the opposition party and using that to really put pressure on the Prime Minister. So I think that's interesting. And yes, of course, they will all be wanting to continue the Mandelson discussion for as long as possible. I mean, her first scalp was Angela Rayner and then Mandelson. So they're going to keep going.
Although, can the Tories really claim credit for getting rid of Angela Rayner? I mean, I was on holiday that week, so I wasn't as steeped in it as you guys were. But to me, it seemed like it was the newspapers that made the running on that.
Of course.
And Tories benefited from that.
Yes, and with Mandelson, it was Labour MPs. I mean, MPs were texting in going, this is absolutely infuriating. We've got one credible thing, which is, our record on violence against women and girls, and we can't get rid of that. All of those kind of things. It's really the PLP and the media. There's lots of factors. But of course, Badenoch will be saying this is one thing she can hold on to as a kind of success that she's had.
Just rewinding back to earlier on in the week, what was the moment where the kind of collective wisdom was, Mandelson's got to go? Because it switched very quickly from he's doing a great job in Washington. He helped cement the unlikely friendship between Starmer and Trump. He got what they call a trade deal, which people say is actually not really a trade deal, but it is some kind of agreement. He's hosting these great parties with tech bosses. And then when did the switch get flicked?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important point, by the way, because as I wrote in my column, Westminster's collective wisdom has a habit of shamelessly overcorrecting. And I think this is a particularly shameless example.
In other words, going massively in the other direction.
Yeah, it's a huge overcorrection, right? Because nobody was saying, oh my God, what an insane appointment when people were being invited to those parties, or Mandelson.
Morris Glasman was.
Yeah, Morris Glasman was, to be fair, although he's never.
Who is the Labour peer who's credited with creating this thing called Blue Labour, which is a much more kind of like right-wing version of Labour.
He is never afraid to go against the grain, to be fair to Morris. But very few people in the mainstream of Westminster were saying that then. But I think what set this off was on Monday when court disclosures released entries from the now infamous birthday book Ghislaine Maxwell compiled for Jeffrey Epstein, and we saw the profane poem written by Donald Trump, but we also saw...
And this was in the early noughties when he turned 50.
Yes, exactly, 2003. And we also saw over, I think, a dozen pages, a sort of handwritten, sort of quite abstract... Well, it wasn't abstract. The pictures were sort of Peter Mandelson, Jeffrey Epstein and various people. A handwritten note from Peter Mandelson to Jeffrey Epstein, which included the words yum yum, about...
Best pals.
Yeah, best pals, we love you. And that sort of... Why that was significant was because Peter Mandelson had always stuck to a very deliberate line, which was he regretted ever being introduced by Jeffrey Epstein by Ghislaine Maxwell, and also, which he emphasised in every interview, the harm that Jeffrey Epstein had done to young girls. That, I think, gave the impression that he might have been, a sort of part of Jeffrey Epstein's broad circle of acquaintances,
like lots of people were.
Yeah, like Bill Clinton and Senator George Mitchell, and basically name any American luminary in public life in the last 50 years. But that sort of opened our eyes, or opened sort of people's eyes to a degree of intimacy that I think lots of people hadn't quite clocked, or hadn't been laid out in Peter Mandelson's own words, because we'd seen emails from Epstein about Mandelson, but we'd never seen it set out by Mandelson himself quite like that. And then these things have an almost unstoppable momentum. Then it became, what more is there to find? Bloomberg got a load of emails from Mandelson to Epstein between the two of them, again from the court disclosures, which emerged overnight on Wednesday. Peter Mandelson did...
Well, this is the interesting thing about the timeline. What I hadn't quite grasped until yesterday, Thursday, is that Bloomberg had got hold of all these emails, including the bombshell email where Mandelson said to Epstein in 2008, just as he was about to go to jail, you've got to fight this, it's so unfair. They got hold of that on Monday and had approached Peter Mandelson in Washington on Monday, and he'd acknowledged receipt of the emails, but not given them a statement or answered any of their questions. And then he does the interview with Harry Cole from The Sun on Harry Cole Saves the West on kind of Tuesday night. And so he's trying to obviously get ahead of the stuff that he knows is coming.
I regret very, very deeply indeed carrying on that association with him for far longer than I should have done. And I regret very much that I fell for his lies. I fell and accepted assurances that he had given me about his indictment, his original criminal case in Florida. Like very many people, I took at face value what he said.
Yeah, and then Harry Cole publishes that email where he does say, you have to fight for early release. And I think that was the moment that opinion really switched in the PLP.
The Parliamentary Labour Party.
Yeah.
But in the middle of that was Prime Minister's Questions. So the birthday book came out on Monday. The Harry Cole interview was a few days after that. Prime Minister's Question time was Wednesday midday, and then the email saying, "Oh, you should fight. I don't approve of you being convicted," was Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, at that point, and then Number 10 got sight of the rest of the Bloomberg emails that evening. I think at that point, opinion in Downing Street shifted. It went from a sort of, look, this is known already. We already knew this. Yes, it's embarrassing, but this is a very important job. We've got a state visit next week, which Peter Mandelson has spent a lot of time organising. He, by the nature of his job, he's very plugged into the administration. There's also a tech deal with the US that they're announcing next week. So, understandably, they were reluctant to blow all of that up, particularly given the Donald Trump dimension of all this, right? Donald Trump's position is that the birthday book is forged. So, the Starmer is going to receive a president having sacked his ambassador on the basis of stuff he found out from the birthday book and the emails. And then here's someone with even bigger questions to answer about Jeffrey Epstein. So that's really tricky. But yeah, by Wednesday, it was clear to a lot of people in Downing Street and in the broader government. Sienna says MPs were up in arms. More than 50 of them told the chief whip, "Up with this, we will not put." By that point, it was clear that he had to go, and that's what happened overnight.
But I mean, isn't there some merit, Sienna, to Starmer's argument, or the argument that Starmer's friends would put, which is that he was waiting to get more information because actually the birthday book, as distasteful as people found it, wasn't a crime in itself. I mean, of course, Peter Mandelson's not committed any crimes here. I'm being rhetorical. It's like, actually, the emails did not exist for everyone to see at the point at which the Prime Minister was defending Peter Mandelson.
But why didn't they? Why didn't they know about those emails, and why weren't they? I mean, as you say, not much. It's really about optics, isn't it? When you read those messages in the birthday book and then you read the email, it's like it's sort of sickening. It's weird. It's creepy. It's sort of disgusting to read. But we already knew the facts, which were he continued some kind of relationship with Jeffrey Epstein after his conviction. That was already known. And why was that not a concern until this week? Why does it take being kind of repulsed by some handwritten words and an email to push them into action?
Well, and it was notable that Downing Street's line after Mandelson was sacked was pretty nonsensical. It was the Prime Minister hadn't realised that he had thought Epstein was innocent. Basically, it was like, well, hang on.
Yeah.
You already knew that he had stayed at his house after his conviction. So why is it okay if he was friends with him, if he knew he was guilty?
Well, no, couldn't you argue there's a difference? I mean, we're getting really into the weeds here, but couldn't you argue there's a difference between going and staying at the home of somebody after they've served a sentence and done their time?
True.
I mean, people are allowed to be rehabilitated, and you can be friends with them after they've been rehabilitated. The thing that was different was the email.
That's true. That's another way of putting it. And as a good lawyer, maybe Starmer saw it that way.
Are there similarities between how the Mandelson thing played out and the Angela Rayner thing played out?
Great question. I think yes, cosmetically, but I think this is essential of all political resignations or sackings you don't want to happen initially. Keir Starmer burnt through a lot of his already pretty into the red overdraft of political capital. In Angela Rayner's case, giving a very extravagant defence of her, and in Peter Mandelson's case, giving a very public defence of him. And that is why I suspect, as the front page of the Times this morning by my colleagues notes, allies of Peter Mandelson say he feels ill-treated by the Prime Minister, because it's basically the Prime Minister will defend you, say he's got full confidence in you, and then all of a sudden...
Turn on you.
Yeah, turn on you. Big time. And in Peter Mandelson's case, sack him.
Which is reminiscent of Boris Johnson, which is exactly the kind of thing that they do not want to be reminding everyone of. That's what brought down Boris Johnson is, well, more specifically, sending people out to defend something that you then back down on, and doing that repeatedly is the best way to ensure that your ministers don't back you anymore. We're not at that point, but, it's corrosive in terms of the mood of the parliamentary party. I'd also say that the kind of common thread with Angela Rayner and Peter Mandelson is the kind of ethical dimension, which is more difficult to talk about, but it's about the fact that Keir Starmer is seen as, a decent guy whose main kind of pitch is he can't walk by injustice and not say anything. And with both of these things, I think there is an ethical dimension to them that people felt very uncomfortable that he's supposed to be the rules guy, and yet he had to wait until the ethics advisor told him the thing was wrong before he acted in the Rayner case. And then he had to wait until his MPs and everyone else came to the conclusion it was wrong to act in the Mandelson case.
I completely agree. And that is the big political risk for the government. Why is reform eating its lunch and destroying the Tory party, and in a position where Nigel Farage could conceivably be Prime Minister at the next election? Yes, immigration is a big issue, but it's also this public revulsion at the political class and the total disappearance of trust in mainstream politics. I mean, the details of both these scandals and controversies basically could have been written to vindicate Nigel Farage's critique of the political class. One of them, by their own admission, maintained a friendship, yes, which they've apologised for and profoundly regret, with one of the world's most notorious paedophiles, and the other appears to have engaged in some financial chicanery that other people, normal people, couldn't have done, all while Keir Starmer maintains this slightly sanctimonious claim of ownership to what few ethics are left in politics. It's that sort of disconnect and that sense of everything you described, Sienna, which is a huge political problem for the government and Keir Starmer himself.
In the midst of this, have you seen any evidence of the reshuffled cabinet doing stuff?
There hasn't been much space for that, has there? Because there has also been...
I mean, they must have been going to work.
Yes.
Some of
There's
them.
been this deputy leadership election, of course. So this is the kind of secondary thing we've been talking about this week. At the beginning, people... Really, I had so many people saying, I want Shabana Mahmood to do it. And yes, of course, she could be Home Secretary and running for the deputy leadership at the same time. I thought, I'm not sure she's going to run the risk of losing. And
Why did so many people want her to run for the deputy leadership?
Because she's seen as having very good political instincts. I mean, basically, her reaction to the sentencing council issue. I don't know.
So this was the idea when the sentencing council were like, judges should commission more pre-sentencing reports to look at the background of where people have come from, and that maybe they'd get a different sentence on the basis of that background.
That they would get a pre-sentencing report if they met certain criteria, and that criteria excluded certain things and included other things, and people
like
are
race.
unhappy. Well, like race, exactly, but it wouldn't include, for example, being working class or something like that. Anyway. Don't have to get into that, but people really...
Basically, she squished that really quickly.
She squished it really
I just invented a new word, squished. She squished that very quickly.
She squished it, yeah. And other things, she's just seen as sensible, decisive, and had a difficult brief and did well in it. So people really wanted that to happen. That didn't happen in the end, I think, kind of predictably. But instead, we've got this race between Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, and in the end, Lucy Powell, which... is interesting.
Who a week
really.
ago was the leader of the House of Commons.
Well, exactly. So recently sacked from government. So I'd say overall, this isn't the worst that the contest could have gone for number 10, because you've got two people, one in government, one only recently sacked from government, who hasn't expressed that much in her pitch yet. That might change as she starts to talk to members. But there wasn't that much criticism of the government there.
Well, it's interesting because the first person out of the gate was Emily Thornberry, who went on Laura's show on Sunday and basically massively slagged off the government straight away before she'd even officially entered the contest. So actually,
Yes.
That's an example of how it could have gone much worse from the Downing Street perspective.
Well, Emily Thornberry appears to have overshot somewhat, and she also was seen as being too critical of the other candidates. She went straight out of the bat and started criticising Bridget Phillipson over the SEND reforms, and that was seen quite badly by some MPs. So if there had been more time and the kind of process wasn't so truncated, and also, of course, those early reforms that Keir Starmer made when he was opposition leader, he changed the rules to massively increase the threshold that they need to get in terms of MP nominations. If none of that had happened, maybe the race would have turned out differently. But yeah, Morgan McSweeney had one success over the last week, which was he was proven right in terms of those rule changes and how he crafted the situation for this exact eventuality, and one failure.
And I mean, where does Lucy Powell sit in this race? Because I've seen lots of people saying, she's actually like Andy Burnham's sleeper agent in the cabinet. And now she's going to be basically, whenever you see Lucy Powell saying something, you should just imagine it's Andy Burnham, the mayor of Manchester.
Well, I was about to say, you cut my joke off at the knees. 'Cause
Sorry.
when you said, where does she sit? I was going to say next to Andy Burnham. Now, look, I know you're a geek, Adam, and Newscast listeners are proud geeks. So let me employ a comparison I used in the Times earlier this week, an analogy from US political history. So listeners may remember or may not remember, not all of them are that old, and I imagine very few of them from Alabama. But in Alabama in the 1960s, there was a very notorious governor called George Wallace, who was constitutionally barred from running for a second term, but was hugely popular, wanted to maintain his control in Alabama. What did he do? He ran his wife Lurleen instead, and she became the governor. Then she sadly died, and then he took back control. Some people suspect Andy Burnham is doing the same thing here. Lucy Powell is his proxy in this contest. Now, I do think that's unfair to Lucy Powell, who has lots of experience in Labour politics, has been around for a long time, has obviously served in the cabinet, etc., etc.
Was Ed Miliband's chief of staff?
Yes,
he was
exactly.
Labour leader.
Exactly. So she is, she has a long pedigree in Labour politics. But what is clear is Andy Burnham's intervention last Sunday. He said, I want to see someone like Lucy Powell or Louise Haig in this race. He set up this group called Mainstream, which is really giving the government a kicking. And Lucy
Oh,
Powell...
yeah, they put out a very, very
Yeah, they
pointed
did.
statement yesterday about the Mandelson story.
Very
yeah.
punchy stuff.
Yeah, accusing, Keir Starmer of trying to advance the interests of one faction within the Labour Party. So Andy Burnham's gloves are off. Now, that's not to say Lucy Powell is his placeholder, but she's close to Andy Burnham. She might advance some of that critique. As Sienna says, she doesn't have a huge amount of bandwidth to say everything the government's done in the first year is wrong because she was a loyal member of the cabinet until last week. She'll have a bit of latitude, but she'll be backed by Andy Burnham. And Andy Burnham will be able to go to places she won't and say, we need a northern voice. We need someone who isn't in government to be an honest broker for the members. So that relationship, I think, is going to be really, really key. And they could be quite a dangerous combination for Keir Starmer, because I think Lucy Powell is often underrated as a political operator, not least because she got well over 100 nominations when there are other people around Keir Starmer who basically think she's a bit of a joke, and she's proven she can out-organise other candidates with bigger names and bigger media profiles.
Yeah, that was my takeaway last night when we just finished recording the episode and the final tally of nominations had come in, and we're all frantically counting how many.
Yeah, why not give us the numbers?
Each candidate, and I was surprised how many nominations Lucy Powell got. I was like, oh, she's more popular amongst her colleagues than you might have imagined.
She did really well. She clearly understands Labour MPs because she knew exactly how to pitch it, because they found some of the other pitches. They had this hustings, this online private hustings, and they found some of the other ones just too critical or full of cliches or whatever. There were various complaints. But yeah, she knew how to run that campaign. So that's testament to her kind of skills there. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, this whole, is it a proxy war between Keir Starmer and Andy Burnham? Obviously, that's the story that all Westminster journalists want it to be, because it's more interesting than what the deputy leader race has actually turned out to be. But
what, two men competing against each other rather than the two women that we've actually got competing against each other?
I mean, to be fair, I think it's more about the fact that Andy Burnham has set up this group and they are being so critical in a way that Lucy Powell probably won't be. But the kind of mechanics of it, Lucy Powell, if she does win the deputy leadership, she will get a seat on Labour's National Executive Committee, the ruling body.
Which, when I was going back and reading the Labour Party rule book, I suddenly realised that's why it's such an important role. It's not like, oh, if the Prime Minister falls under a bus, you get to be Prime Minister, because that's not how it works. It's actually being there at the top table, setting the rules for things.
Or adjudicating on who gets to be a Labour candidate.
Exactly. So the NEC oversees things like candidate selection processes. Of course, that is Andy Burnham's route in to the PLP and then perhaps becoming Prime Minister. Obviously now Labour MPs are really discussing how would that really work? Is he waiting for a vacancy? Is he even considering coming in and being a challenger? But then also, in order to get a seat, I mean, yes, a Manchester MP would have to stand down and kind of present this by-election opportunity, which is perfectly possible. But Andy Burnham would have to take a huge risk in running against Reform, who are obviously doing incredibly well. Also, would there be any sort of local resentments about Andy Burnham just being given this seat? I mean, there would be a real contest there. It's certain that nobody would be letting Andy Burnham have an easy ride in order to come in, because that wouldn't be in the interests of any other leadership contenders in the future. I mean, this is all very premature, but this is what people are talking about at the moment.
It's fun to speculate, though, isn't it? Let's speculate on where Keir Starmer actually is. I just realised before we started recording, I haven't seen him, like, not that I hang out with him very often. I don't mean in person, I mean on the airwaves, since Wednesday.
He's not replied.
That's quite unusual.
No, it is. It is. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a Friday. Maybe he's on his way to Chequers. Maybe he's doing some like constituency business. I don't know. I mean, and it's quite strange that he hasn't appeared in public once. You know, sacking the US ambassador is a big deal. It's a really big deal. Like, it's not the sort of thing, you know, prime ministers often do. It dominated the headlines today and will dominate it, I think, really until he says something.
Unless you don't really like the system that kind of forced you to sack the ambassador in the first place, then maybe you're not going to play to it.
No, but political judgment is about biting your lip and, you know, or your tongue, actually not biting your tongue, you know, gritting your teeth, There you go. That's the right.
Gritting your teeth and then speaking.
Yeah, exactly. That's the correct orthodontic metaphor.
Yeah.
You know, and then saying, yes, I know this annoys me, but it's politically important that I say something, because this will just run and run and run. There'll be more criticism of Morgan Sweeney as well, which is destabilising for the Prime Minister ultimately. Until the Prime Minister is frank about what he knew and when and gives an explanation, he's going to have to do that at some point. I mean, and also, by the way, ideally he needs to do it before the state visit. Otherwise, when there's the press conference, what is every enterprising lobby journalist going to ask about? By the way, you know, do you think it's awkward about the whole Epstein, Mandelson, Donald Trump thing? He wants to move on and wants the lobby to have had their fill by them.
And just quickly before we wrap up, Sienna, actual news today from the ONS, the GDP figures, which show the last 3 months the economy grew a bit. But one of those months it was zero.
Yeah.
And actually that's yet more pressure on Rachel Reeves and the build up to the budget.
It really is. I mean, we knew during the general election campaign when Labour kept talking about the kind of magic growth tree that this was very unlikely, and so it's come to be. They're in real trouble, and there are a few flashpoints coming up. Obviously, there's conference, but that's quite a controlled affair these days. It's not very exciting, unfortunately, for us journalists. But then there's also the budget. And if the budget doesn't inflict enough damage, then there's the May elections. So this next 6 months is really testy for this government.
What we're going to hear from Rachel Reeves in that budget next month, and you're already hearing it from her, is all about growth, right? That is her reputation, and thus that of Keir Starmer is staked on that one word. Key cabinet appointments, you know, you were talking about that earlier. Pat McFadden's now leading the Department for Work and Pensions, but basically they're now calling it the Super Ministry for Growth. Steve Reid, the environment
because it's work and pensions and skills.
Yeah, Steve Reid moving from environment to housing, again, all about growth. Emma Reynolds, the new environment secretary, is going to be deregulating in the hope of driving growth. There's lots more the government could do, but what it has done thus far clearly hasn't had the impact they hoped. And they, as Sienna says, they're running out of time before a big and potentially apocalyptic electoral judgment on their performance so far. And it might be too little too late.
Although let's be honest about next week. Donald Trump is coming to Britain. That's the
story.
He's like the size of the sun, and all of the things we've been talking about are like the size of Mercury in comparison.
Labour's NEC.
Exactly. So that's what I've learned from covering Trump for all these years. It's like he just blots out absolutely everything else. So I wonder if the world might feel very different kind of next Friday. But let's see. Sienna, thank you.
Thank you.
Patrick, thanks to you too.
Pleasure.